everyone. I'm Grandmaster Priyadharshan Kannappan from India, and I'm the author of the Modernized Berlin Wall Defense, published by Thinkers Publishing. And this book was released in December 2019. I actually have a physical copy of the book so that you have an idea of how the book looks like. So this is how the book looks like in a print version. You can buy the e-version of this book in the Forward Chess app. So this book is aimed at players who want to learn the Berlin defense from black side, or players who are already playing the Berlin defense and they want to, learn some more ideas or understand Berlin defense in a deeper way. So this book is for such players also. So what makes me a subject expert to write about the Berlin defense? So, first of all, I'm a grandmaster. So that is one. And another thing about it is that I learned about Berlin for the first time in 2003. So this is right after the Kasparov Kramnik match when Berlin really became, the very popular opening. So I picked up the ideas in 2003 when one of my coaches recommended to me and said, Berlin could be a good fit for my playing style and so on. And that's how I learned the Berlin for the first time. And I'm, still we are now in 2020, and I've played Berlin all through these years. I've, understood Berlin in my own way. I've mainly the way I learned Berlin was by seeing lots and lots of games, and not by understanding exact moves, but knowing like where should the pieces go in which pawn structure and so on. So more like by feeling for the position and so on. So that's how I learned the Berlin, and it was a good fit for me because I was never really a person who could play 40 moves of theory or 30 moves of theory, but I knew where the pieces should go. So it fit well for my style of play and my understanding of chess. And so that is one of the reasons why I felt, I have some ideas, unique ideas in Berlin that I can contribute or I can write in a book and, contribute to the chess literature and the Berlin defense. So that's why I wrote the book. And that's basically what you will see in the Modernized Berlin Wall Defense book. So now let's get into the content that I want to discuss in this author files video. So as you can see, I'm right now on the Forward Chess app, and the book, this is how the opening page of the book is on the app. And this book, you see the table of contents on the right side, title page, key to symbols, and the foreword for this book was written by my mentor, Grandmaster and former women's world chess champion Susan Polgar. So she wrote the foreword for this book, and then you have the preface. And then there is 6 chapters in this book, and the first chapter is alternatives on move 4. So what we discuss on this chapter is mainly, let's say, after bishop b5, knight f6 over here, if white goes something like queen e2, or white goes d4, or bishop takes c6. So in this, I would spend some of my time and effort if I'm reading this chapter on Queen E2. Mainly, that's the most critical of the 3 continuations, I feel, and figure out, where should I place my pieces and so on. That's chapter 1, basically. And chapter 2 is the 4 knights variation. So the 4 knights variation normally occurs through knight f3, knight c6, after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and white, going knight c3 on move 3, black goes knight f6, and then, white goes bishop b5. But over here, we have a slightly inverted move order where white first plays third move, bishop b5, and for knight f6 goes knight c3. Many black players hate to play the 4 knights. The reason being it is a very dry opening. White gets a slight edge, or maybe not even a slight edge, just some minor problems that he can pose for black. And that's all white wants. White just wants a pretty equalish or a more of strategic game and nothing dynamic in the position. So I'm recommending knight d4 as my choice against the 4 knights, because I feel this is the sharpest variation that black has in this position to complicate matters. And I think this kind of will take white from their comfort, slight better positions, and make them think and figure out and calculate variations, which generally the players who play four knights don't prefer, because they want a non-theoretical variation, and that's the reason why they are playing four knights. So if you read chapter 2, you'll get a good understanding of knight c3, knight d4 variations. And I have some amazing novelties packed into this chapter. So this is some chapter you can spend a lot of time discovering ideas and reading through the novelties and so on. And chapter 3 basically talks about the variations that arise after, let's say, e4 e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, short castle, knight e4. And here, instead of d4, which would lead us to the end game, if white goes moves like rook e1, which is now actually becoming very popular, or queen e2 and so on. So these variations that don't, where white plays d4, the other variations is what is discussed in chapter 3. And chapter 4, we are going to be talking about lines without bishop takes c6 on move 6. So what I mean by this is, after e4 e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, short castle, knight e4, d4, knight d6. And over here, white has options like bishop g5, bishop a4, d takes e5. All these moves are generally very popular in shorter time control games like Rapid and Blitz format. A lot of strong grandmasters try them from white side. And because these lines have a lot of venom for shorter time controls, because generally you don't know what to do, and you're kind of caught by the surprise because these are not the main lines. And black can easily go wrong. But if black knows what he's doing, black will get equal, or even sometimes even slightly better position this black. So these are variations you should always be aware of, kind of know how to exactly respond. And that's basically chapter 4. And chapter 5 is the Berlin endgame, which arises after, let's say, move 5, d4, knight d6, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, d e5, knight f5, queen d8, and king d8. So this chapter is what I'm going to be discussing in depth in this author files video. So, but before we, look at this chapter in depth, I just want to say what we have on chapter 6 and what is actually the appendix of this book. So chapter 6 is the anti-Berlin that arises after the fourth move d3. So, after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, I'm waiting for the chapter to load. After bishop b5, knight f6 on move 3, white plays fourth move d3. So this move, fourth move d3, is considered the anti-Berlin. But why do I have this as my main chapter, or the most important chapter of this book? Because that's why it's the final chapter of the book. The reason being that anti-Berlin is now more popular than the Berlin endgame. More and more white players think they can fight for an advantage playing the anti-Berlin. And because of that, the popularity of this variation has exploded. And 4d3 that's the main reason why this is my final chapter of the book. And for 4d3, so far all the Berlin books that have been written from black's perspective have covered or given their choice as bishop c5. Nothing wrong with bishop c5, but I suggested d6 here as the option for black. And the reason why I suggested is, one, because bishop c5 is extremely analyzed now. Lot of strong players have played it out. There's like so much of theory and in depth you need to know, and I felt it's not needed, and there must be something fresh in the idea. And 4d6 from by black here is less explored compared to bishop c5, and black still gets fantastic position. So why not play d6? Because white will also be not very knowledgeable of how he can try to fight for an edge, if there is a way to fight for an edge. So that is the reason why I am suggesting fourth move d6 for black here. So this is the chapter 6 and the final chapter of this book. And after all the chapters are completed, I have an appendix section on the book. So the appendix section is basically 100 games to help you understand the Berlin endgame. So what this is the chapter 5, where we get the Berlin endgame. So you will get a deeper and a better understanding of the end game if you also see these 100 games that I have recommended in this chapter. So you can go to your database and look out for these games and understand them. So these 100 games may not actually follow the variations that are recommended on chapter 5, but they may, be, more broadly, broad based variations, some variations that are not discussed in chapter, but those more orders also will be following here. The overall idea why I gave this 100 games appendix is so that you get a complete 360-degree understanding of the Berlin endgame. And initially what I did is I filtered through the games in my database, and basically I took the last 10 years of the games, and at least one of the side is a very strong player. That was a prerequisite. And then I went and then I sorted the list to around 500 games, and from that 500 I eliminated ideas that generally repeated, or some games did not have a lot of fresh ideas. So I eliminated them, and then I brought them to 100 games that you should know to get a deeper understanding of the Berlin endgame. And you can see some amazing players being listed here. You see, Kramnik, Karyak and Kramnik on game number 3. You see like Rayabov, Carlson. So all these players are experts with Berlin, with sometimes with both colors, not just white or black, but with both white and black. So if you read these 100 games in depth, you can understand Berlin in a more deeper fashion, is what I feel like. So now let's get back to chapter 5, the end game, the Berlin end game, which I want to discuss in this video. So the end game will start with the first move. Obviously, let's look from the start: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, short castle, knight e4, d4, knight d6, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, d takes e5, knight f5, queen d8, and king d8. So we have reached the endgame. The queens are swapped off the board and the endgame is here. So here white has numerous moves. White can play h3, white can play rook e1, white can play rook d1 check, white can play knight c3. Knight c3 is the most popular move and the main line of my book. And before we go into knight c3 and talk about the main line, I just want to briefly cover some of the dubious alternatives that white has in this position. So after king d8, for example, white has a move like, knight g5 here or bishop g5. So let's start with knight g5. Why am I considering or think this move is dubious? Because primarily black will anyway play king e8 in most of these variations. So by going knight g5, white actually gains nothing. It's just helping black to just simply execute whatever anyway he intended to play, that is king e8. So when black goes king e8 and white goes rook d1, black gains a very crucial tempo, that is h6. So now white goes knight e4, and then we have bishop e6. So generally this bishop on e6 and pawn on h6 is kind of like a combination. If you do this, you do the other thing, kind of thing. The main reason being, if you just simply go bishop e6 without h6, you need to be worried about knight g5 ideas at trying to capture or exchange the bishop on e6. And if you just simply go h6, there are games where black simply goes h6, but generally it is combined with bishop e6. And if white goes knight bc3 here, black goes rook d8. And an important point to note is that black is not committing where he wants to develop his f8 bishop. Maybe the bishop will go to e7. Maybe the situation demands the bishop can go to b4. So rook d8 was played by black. Rook takes d8, king takes d8, bishop f4, and black just simply goes king c8. And black has absolutely nothing to worry in this position. The main ideas, if you think about, is that, for example, black can go bishop e7 if he wants, or black can go g5, bishop g7 and target or attack the e5 pawn. So this is also one key idea for black in this position. So black is doing fantastic. So this is if knight g5. So another option for white on the ninth move, which is a dubious option, is to go c4. The reason why knight c4 is dubious is because it gives kind of an outpost for black on the d4 square. square. So for c4, black can go bishop e6, attacking the pawn, and white goes b3. And remember what I said, black will go h6. So kind of h6 and bishop e6 go hand in hand. So for h6, if white goes knight c3, black simply goes king c8. And again, a point to notice that black is delaying where he wants to put his f8 bishop. So white goes h3, and now white is threatening to go g4. A very key idea to remember is that whenever white plays h3, it is generally combined with two plans. One is white wants to go g4 immediately, or in a move or two later, or another idea is white wants to go bishop f4 and place his f4 bishop on h2. So these are the two possible ideas why white generally goes h3. And here h3 is played in mind with white wanting to go g4, the next move. So black realizes this and black goes c5. So if you do go g4, now black will simply go knight to d4. So for c5, white decided to go knight e2, stopping knight d4 idea. Black simply goes g5. So now g4 is not a very effective move for white because black can just simply drop back with this knight. So the main move is bishop b2 for white here. And for bishop b2, black simply goes b6 and knight d2, h5, knight e4, bishop e7. So black has expanded his king side pawns, and black can simply go king b7 followed up by rook a d8 or rook a g8 and play on the king side also if he wants to. And also at any point black can just simply throw in a5 and forcing white to go a4 kind of move, and black has a very fine position. I assess this position as unclear in my book. So we so far talked about two dubious moves, which are ninth move c4 and ninth move knight g5. And then, for example, there are options like ninth move b3, but then black simply goes a5. And most of these lines would transpose to previous, variations or other variations in this book. And if white is very aggressive and white immediately wants to kick away this knight away from f5, and so white goes g4, this would be of a very bad move for white because black simply drops back knight e7, and after h3 black counterattacks with h5. And after knight g5, black can go king e8, and after f3, the dark squares near the white king is kind of weak. So black goes knight g6 with possibly the idea to go bishop c5 with a check, or black just can simply play bishop e7, and also the e5 pawn is now hanging. So black actually has a equals plus position after rook e1, bishop e7. And this is ninth move g4. So now let's talk about ninth move bishop g5 check, which is also a dubious move, primarily for the same reason that black anyway is going to go king e8. So why do you want to provoke the king to go to e8? And after king e8, knight c3, black gains that critical tempo h6, and after bishop d2, we know what to do. Once we play h6, we will go bishop e6. So for bishop e6, rook a d1, rook d8, bishop c1. Now black senses an opportunity or a drawback of white's previous move, which is that once white went bishop c1, the c3 knight is kind of weak. So black goes bishop b4, threatening to play bishop takes c3, ruin white's queenside pawn structure, also capture the pawn on a2. So for bishop b4, white plays rook d8 check, king d8, and goes rook d1, and black simply goes king c8. The reason why black wants to go king c8 is because now he has the option to go rook e8 or rook d8, which would not exist if he places his king on e8 and so on. And black has a fantastic position. It's an equals plus evaluation. And in my database, this position black had 3 games, and in all those 3 games, black won. So that shows how good of a position black has reached in this particular variation. So the line that we just talked about were all like dubious options for white. Right after we reach the end game position, after queen takes d8, king takes d8. So the most critical lines is what we are going to discuss now, and that arises after queen d8, king d8, knight c3, a5, and then h3. So let's get into that variation. So after knight c3, I am suggesting a5. So this move is an interesting move, and it's actually not the most popular move. This move is, I think, the ninth most popular move in or response for black in this position. So the more popular responses than a5 for black or moves like knight e7 or bishop d7 or h6 or bishop e7 or bishop e6 and so on. So why am I suggesting a move that is not even anywhere near the popular moves? I mean, is it reliable if not that many players are playing it with black? It's completely fine. I have shown that in more or less all the variations, black gets equal. In some variations, black even gets a slightly better position. And the reason why I am suggesting this variation is one, because it is less explored. So there is a lot of fresh ideas that you can find in this. Another, it can easily catch your opponent by surprise because they would not be prepared for a move like a5. And another thing about this, it is a semi-committal move. It's kind of like a waiting move. You're waiting to see if white is going to put his rook on e1 or if his rook is going to go to d1. What is he going to do with this c3 knight? Is the knight going to go to e2 or is the knight going to go to e4 and so on? So you're kind of playing a waiting game. You want to see what white wants to do, and there are a lot of options for white here, which are considered in the other variations that are above this chapter, like on instead of h3. So you can go through that once you go through the book. But here, what I'm going to consider in this video is h3, which is the most critical variation for white in my opinion. So for h3, I'm suggesting king e8. So point about h3 is kind of a waiting move, and also it has two ideas behind it, which I've already mentioned. One is white is kind of threatening to go g4, and also another is white wants to go bishop f4. These two are the ideas that white has in mind behind h3, other than it being also a general good waiting move for white. So black continues to do his waiting approach and go king e8. I have suggested an idea with a4 here, but that is not my recommendation, but I'm just suggesting or giving what can possibly happen if you do go a4. A5 a4 is a standard idea. When you go a5, you do want to expand on the queen side and get more space, but this is not the right time to do, in my opinion, to play a4 after h3. But you can still go through the variations if you want. So the variation I am recommending is to go king e8. Again, I'm playing a waiting move. I'm just getting the king out of possible danger on rook d1 check or bishop g5 check ideas. And for king e8, white's response is bishop f4, which is the most critical response. And that kind of goes well with whenever white goes h3, he's immediately threatening to go g4 or bishop f4. Let's see, if white goes bishop g5 instead of bishop f4, then black simply goes bishop e6. And after rook fd1, this transposes to another variation in the same chapter. So one important thing to understand is that Berlin, there is a lot of transpositions before white and also for black. So black, I mean, both the sides need to be very careful that they kind of like don't get transposed to a position that they are not very familiar with. So that is something to be very careful about. And in case if white goes rook d1 on move 11, that also transposes to a node that is on the variations mentioned above. So we are looking at bishop f4. The main idea of bishop f4 for white is, okay, one, the rooks are now connected, both the white rooks. Another thing is that white at some point wants to go e6, and white wants to swap his e pawn for the c7 pawn. So the benefits that white get by swapping the e pawn for the c pawn is that once the e file opens up, the king on e8 will feel very unsafe. And another factor is that once c7 pawn falls, the d6 square is kind of weak, which white can try to exploit. And whenever white goes e6, the e5 square gets cleared for white's another piece, like maybe the knight, maybe the bishop going knight e5 or bishop e5 and so on. So that's the reason why white goes bishop f4 in this particular position. So for bishop f4, the variation I'm suggesting is to like kind of like directly stop e6 from happening. So go bishop e6. So here, if white goes, let's say white plays kind of an aggressive approach to this position and white goes g4, then black simply drops back, knight e7. And if white goes knight d4, black goes knight d5. This knight d5 idea is a very common idea when white has a knight on c3 and bishop on f4. So this way, black gets to swap some minor pieces off the board. And knight e6, f takes e6, and if bishop d2, black goes bishop b4. So now black is threatening to ruin white's queenside pawn structure. So white is forced to play knight d5, and now black captures with the c pawn. So now the double pawn is also, that kind of a problem is resolved for black. And after bishop e3, king d7, this is a complex, unclear position where black can pull back his bishop to e7 if needed, and then play c5, b5, d4, expand on the queen side. And white may try to expand on the king side with some f4, f5 break. A complex, unclear position, but I think it's a very fighting rich position for ideas for both sides here, I feel. And this position was reached in the game Alexander Galkin against Alexander Alexandrov. And Alexandrov, Grandmaster Alexandrov, is one of the experts for black in the Berlin defense. So if you want to follow an expert on how he plays, you should look at Alexandrov games in the Berlin defense as black side. So we just looked at, let's say we were just looking at after bishop e6, we're looking at g4. So now let's look at rook f d1. What happens after rook f d1? So after rook f d1, black can simply play h6, and this transposes to the Kasparov-Kramnik game that is mentioned in one of the notes in the variation. So now let's get back to the main line, which is white playing a3. So you see white is also kind of doing a waiting approach. White is playing, the idea of a3 is one, to stop bishop to b4, and another is kind of being prophylactically blocking black from going a4 and then threatening to go a3. So a3 is a waiting move and also a very prophylactic move. And for a3, the variation that I'm suggesting is black goes rook d8. So one general thumb rule kind of is, if white allows you to capture the control of the d file, if you have the black pieces, you should go and control the d file. So as white has no rook on d file, so black just simply goes rook d8 in this position. And now white goes rook d1, so that he doesn't give the control of the file complete to the black side. So rook a d1, and then over here black goes bishop e7. So whenever you go bishop e7 in the Berlin endgame with a knight on f5, you need to be very careful about the fact that you have taken away one square away from, the knight going from f5 to e7. But in exchange, you gain one square on h4. So in case of, let's say, white goes g4 in this position, which is the main line, black can go knight h4. If the bishop was on f8, then black can go knight e7, but it's fine, we don't have that square for our knight, because knight h4 is also a good square for the black knight. So for bishop e7, g4 is the main line. So we'll see what happens after g4. Black goes knight h4, knight takes h4, bishop takes h4, and after king g2, h5. So here we are trying to create some weaknesses in white's king side, or say the extended pawn of white's king side. And after king g2, h5, if white goes f3, we just pull the bishop back to e7, because the bishop isn't doing much on h4. And after knight e4, black goes rook d5. So this is an unclear position, but I have not stopped the variation over here. Have given the full game. Like if you see, the variation keeps going on and on after move 18, but those moves are not without any explanation. The reason being, I feel the opening part ends with rook d5, and this is an unclear position where black has a good control over the d5 square. Black is exerting some pressure on the e5 pawn, and I don't see any active threats for white to further improve his position. So for rook d, and the game that I mentioned is this position was actually reached in a game between Motilov and Grandmaster Alexandrov in 2004. And if you do remember, Alexandrov, as I mentioned, is one of the experts in black side of the Berlin defense, and his game is the key game of this line that I have mentioned. So after knight e4, rook d5, the position that we have on the board is unclear according to me. And I think black can also try to go king d7, rook d8, king c8, so on, and also activate his h8 rook if needed. So this is the basically the end of this the end game chapter in the Berlin, and I have suggested this interesting idea with A5 overall, and I do feel like you get to get very rich and fighting positions playing the black side, and that is very critical if you're an open tournament player. If you're playing Swiss tournaments, because you need to win not just with white pieces but also with black pieces. So you do need some interesting, surprising openings, so you can fight for a win against lower rated players also. So that is the reason why I have recommended A5. And I strongly believe that if you have not learned Berlin before, and if you're interested to learn Berlin, you will get a complete understanding of how to handle not just the end game in Berlin, but the anti-Berlin, the sidelines in Berlin, reading this book. And also, if you're already playing Berlin, I'm pretty confident you can pick up a lot of new ideas reading through this book, as this book is filled with a lot of novelties and approaches that are kind of unconventional or not the most popular, but still very solid and perfectly reliable options for black. So this book is for everyone, either if you want to learn the Berlin or if you've already known the Berlin and want to pick up new ideas. So I'm very confident you will all be playing fantastic Berlin after reading this book. So I want to say that Berlin as opening choice, that once you fall in love with this opening, you will be a lifelong supporter or a player of this opening like me. And I wish you all happy reading of this book and become an expert in the Berlin defense. So thank you everyone, and don't forget to buy this book in the Forward Chess app. And the title of the book is The Modernized Berlin World Defense, and I'm Grandmaster Priyadharshan Kannappan. Bye bye, everyone.